The sound of the gavel striking wood silenced the crowd, as Lillian Dawson stood trembling on the wooden platform, her honey-blonde hair falling in tangled waves around her dirt-smudged face. Montana Territory, 1878, was unforgiving to women without means, and after her father's death left her with insurmountable debts, she had become just another piece of property to be sold to the highest bidder in the dusty town of Hecla. $500 for the woman, announced the auctioneer, his voice carrying across the crowd of leering men. A fine specimen to work your ranch or warm your bed. Who'll start the bidding? Lillian kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the sea of unfamiliar faces. She had arrived in Hecla with her father 2 years ago, full of hope for a new beginning after her mother's passing. Now, at 22, she stood alone, her father's mining ventures having yielded nothing but debt and an early grave. $100, called a gruff voice from the back. $150, countered another. Lillian's stomach nodded as the bidding continued. The debts her father had left behind to merchants, to the bank, to men who'd financed his failed dreams had mounted until the sheriff had come knocking. When she couldn't pay, the law had its way, and here she stood, being sold like livestock to cover what her father owed. $300, shouted a man with a scarred face and yellowed teeth, eyeing her in a way that made her skin crawl. $350, came another bid. The crowd parted as a tall figure moved toward the front. Lillian couldn't help but look down as he approached. Broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, he wore a dark Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His dark brown leather vest was worn but well-maintained, covering a faded blue shirt. A gun belt hung at his hip, the revolver's handle smooth from use. $600, he stated firmly, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $600, that's more than the debt. I said $600, the man repeated, his blue eyes finally meeting Lillian's for the briefest moment. A hush fell over the crowd. The scarred man who had bid earlier spat in the dust. Caleb O'Brien's gone soft in the head, paying that much for damaged goods. The tall man Caleb didn't acknowledge the taunt. He simply reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch, counting out the money onto the auctioneer's table. Sold, declared the auctioneer, striking the gavel once more. The woman goes to Caleb O'Brien. Lillian felt her legs weaken as she was led down from the platform. The sheriff removed her shackles and she rubbed her wrists, the skin raw and red. Her new owner approached and she braced herself, wondering what kind of man had paid such a sum for her. "Miss Dawson," he said quietly, tipping his hat. "I'm Caleb O'Brien. I own the Double Circle Ranch about 10 miles outside of town." She nodded, unable to speak, wondering what he expected of her now. To her surprise, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You're shivering," he explained simply. Then he leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You are free with me, Miss Dawson. I've paid your father's debts, but I don't own you. You can stay at my ranch until you decide what you want to do next." Lillian stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be at someone else's mercy." He offered her his arm. "My wagon's this way, unless you'd rather stay in town." Lillian glanced around at the townspeople dispersing from the auction, some still casting curious glances her way. The scarred man who had bid on her was watching with undisguised malice. "I'll go with you," she said quickly, taking his arm. As Caleb led her toward his wagon, Lillian felt the weight of stares upon her back. She had no reason to trust this man, this stranger who had paid $600 for her freedom. Yet somehow, walking beside him through the dusty streets of Hecla, she felt safer than she had in months. "Your father was Jonas Dawson," Caleb asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Lillian nodded, clutching his coat tighter around her shoulders. Yes, he died 3 months ago. Fever took him. Caleb climbed up beside her and took the reins. I'm sorry to hear that. I met him once or twice at the general store. He spoke highly of you. He was a dreamer, Lillian said softly, always chasing the next big strike. Mother died back east, and he brought me here thinking we'd make our fortune. She turned to look at Caleb. I worked as a seamstress in town to keep us afloat, but after he died, they came for everything. Said I was responsible for his debts. Caleb clicked his tongue and the horses began moving. That's not right, he said, his jaw tightening. But it's how things often work out here. The law favors those with money and power. They passed the outskirts of Hecla, the wagon bumping along the rutted trail. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Montana landscape, painting the prairie grass in hues of gold and amber. In the distance, mountains rose against the sky, their peaks still dusted with the remnants of winter snow. Mr. O'Brien, Lillian began hesitantly, I appreciate what you've done, but I have to ask, what do you expect in return? Caleb kept his eyes on the trail ahead. Nothing you're not willing to give. My housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, could use help with the cooking and cleaning. The ranch hands keep to the bunkhouse and you'll have your own room in the main house. He paused. When you've earned enough, you can pay me back if it eases your mind, or you can leave. The choice is yours. Lillian studied his profile, trying to discern any hidden meaning in his words. His features were strong, a straight nose, firm jaw shadowed with stubble, lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting both laughter and hardship. Why? She pressed. Why help me? Caleb sighed, adjusting his hat. 10 years ago, I was little more than a boy when I came to Montana territory, got mixed up with some men who weren't what they seemed, ended up owing a debt I couldn't pay. His voice grew quieter. Someone stepped in and gave me a second chance. I swore if I ever had the opportunity, I'd do the same for someone else. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Lillian found herself relaxing slightly, the tension of the day beginning to ebb. There it is, Caleb said eventually, gesturing ahead. Double circle. Lillian looked up to see a sprawling ranch come into view. A large 2-story house stood at its center, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze and smoke curled from the main house's chimney. Cattle grazed in the distance and several men on horseback moved among them. It's beautiful, Lillian murmured, genuinely impressed. A hint of pride crossed Caleb's face. Worked 10 years to build it. Started with nothing but a run-down cabin and 20 head of cattle. Now we're one of the larger spreads in the county. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Gray-haired and round-faced, she squinted at the wagon, then broke into a smile of recognition. That's Mrs. Finch, Caleb explained. Best cook in Montana territory and doesn't let anyone forget it. He brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house and jumped down, coming around to help Lillian. His hands were strong and calloused as they encircled her waist, lifting her effortlessly to the ground. Caleb O'Brien, who's this you've brought home? Mrs. Finch called, her tone curious rather than disapproving. Mrs. Finch, this is Miss Lillian Dawson. She'll be staying with us for a while. Caleb's tone brooked no argument. Miss Dawson, this is Mrs. Esther Finch, who keeps this place and me from falling into complete disarray. Mrs. Finch's eyes widened slightly as she took in Lillian's disheveled appearance, but she recovered quickly. Well, you look dead on your feet, child. Come inside and have something to eat while I prepare a room for you. Lillian shot a grateful look at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. I need to see to the horses and check in with my foreman. I'll join you for supper." As Mrs. Finch led her inside, Lillian glanced back over her shoulder. Caleb was watching them, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Then he turned away, leading the horses toward the barn. The house was warm and inviting, with polished wooden floors and simple but comfortable furnishings. Mrs. Finch bustled about, talking all the while. "The bathroom's through there. You'll want to wash up. I'll heat water for a proper bath after you've eaten something." She eyed Lillian critically. "And we'll need to find you some clothes. You're smaller than me, but I might have something that will do until we can get to your things." "I don't have any things," Lillian admitted quietly. "They took everything to pay the debts." Mrs. Finch's face softened. "I see. Well, don't you worry, we'll sort something out." She paused, her hand on Lillian's arm. "The boss is a good man, Miss Dawson. Whatever brought you here, you're safe now." Tears stung Lillian's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed to say. After washing her face and hands in the bathroom, Lillian felt marginally better. Mrs. Finch set a bowl of stew in front of her at the kitchen table, along with a thick slice of bread and a cup of coffee. "Eat," she instructed. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks." It was true. As Lillian ate, savoring every bite of the rich, flavorful stew, Mrs. Finch moved around the kitchen, preparing supper for the household. "How many people live here?" Lillian asked between bites. "Well, there's the boss, of course, and me. 10 ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse, though we can have up to 20 during the busy seasons. Cook for them separately, I do, in the cookhouse behind the bunkhouse." Mrs. Finch wiped her hands on her apron. "The boss has the master bedroom upstairs, and there are 3 other bedrooms up there. You can have the one at the end of the hall. Gets the morning sun, it does." Lillian finished her meal and insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Mrs. Finch's protests. As they worked side by side, the older woman told her about life on the ranch, about Caleb's rise from penniless cowboy to respected rancher, about the harsh winters and beautiful springs, about the cattle drives and the occasional visits to town for supplies and social gatherings. "He never married?" Lillian found herself asking, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. Mrs. Finch's expression grew somber. "There was a girl about 5 years back, daughter of a banker from Helena. They were engaged to be married." She sighed deeply. "Consumption took her before the wedding. The boss, he threw himself into the ranch after that, hardly spoke for months. He's better now, but he keeps to himself mostly." Later, after a bath in a copper tub in front of the kitchen fire, the most luxurious experience Lillian had enjoyed in months, she sat in a borrowed nightgown, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders, while Mrs. Finch brushed out her long blonde hair. "Such pretty hair," the older woman commented. "Like spun gold. My mother used to brush mine like this when I was a girl." Her voice took on a teasing quality. "The boss couldn't take his eyes off you when he brought you in." "Mrs. Finch," Lillian protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Just an observation, dear." Mrs. Finch chuckled. "Now, I've laid out some clothes for you in your room. They belong to the boss's sister, who visits from Denver occasionally. She's closer to your size than I am." Lillian followed Mrs. Finch upstairs to a cozy bedroom at the end of the hall. A bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a dresser and washstand against another. A window overlooked the ranch and moonlight spilled across the floor. "This is lovely," Lillian said, genuinely touched by the comfortable arrangements. "Sleep well, dear Mrs. Finch said, patting her shoulder. "Things always look brighter in the morning." Left alone, Lillian crossed to the window and gazed out at the moonlit ranch. Lanterns glowed in the bunkhouse windows, and somewhere a coyote howled. She wondered what Caleb O'Brien really wanted from her, whether his kindness was genuine, or if he had ulterior motives that would reveal themselves in time. She had learned the hard way that people rarely did things without expecting something in return. Yet she couldn't deny the relief she felt at being safe, fed, and warm for the first time in months. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she would rest. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smells of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen below. Lillian dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Finch had left, a simple blue calico dress that was slightly large but clean and whole. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen was bustling. Mrs. Finch moved between the stove and table while two young men, ranch hands, Lillian assumed, sat eating breakfast. They looked up when she entered, surprise evident on their faces. "Morning, miss," one of them said, quickly removing his hat. "Good morning," Lillian replied politely. "Miss Dawson, this is Tom and Charlie, two of our hands," Mrs. Finch introduced. "Boys, this is Miss Dawson. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The men nodded respectfully, finishing their breakfast quickly and excusing themselves. As they left, Caleb entered, looking as though he had already been up for hours. His eyes found Lillian immediately. "Miss Dawson, I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. O'Brien," she replied, acutely aware of Mrs. Finch's interested gaze moving between them. "Please call me Caleb." He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, gesturing for her to join him. "I have to ride out to check the north pasture today, but when I return, we can discuss your duties here." Lillian nodded, accepting the plate Mrs. Finch set before her. "I'm a good seamstress and I can cook and clean. I'm willing to earn my keep." Caleb studied her over his coffee cup. "I don't doubt it, but you should take a day or two to rest and get your bearings. No need to rush." After breakfast, Caleb departed and Lillian insisted on helping Mrs. Finch with the household chores. The older woman accepted her assistance, and they spent the morning washing laundry and hanging it on lines behind the house to dry in the spring breeze. "The boss said you were a seamstress in town?" Mrs. Finch asked as they worked. "Yes, for Mr. Peterson at his shop on Main Street," Lillian confirmed. "I made and altered clothing, did mending, whatever was needed." Mrs. Finch nodded approvingly. "That's a useful skill around here. The men are always tearing their shirts and pants, and the boss needs his good clothes kept up. He's got business in town from time to time, meetings with the cattle buyers and such." As the day progressed, Lillian began to feel more at ease. Mrs. Finch was kind and talkative, filling her in on the rhythms of ranch life and the personalities of the hands. By the time evening approached, Lillian had helped prepare supper, set the table, and even mended a stack of work shirts that had been waiting for Mrs. Finch's attention. Caleb returned as the sun was setting, bringing with him the smell of horses and open air. He washed up outside before coming in, his hair damp and his face freshly shaved. Lillian couldn't help noticing how different he looked without trail dust covering his features, younger somehow, with laugh lines around his blue eyes. Supper was a quiet affair, with just the three of them at the table. Mrs. Finch had already fed the hands in the cookhouse. Caleb asked polite questions about Lillian's day, and she found herself responding more easily than she had expected. There was something about him, a steadiness, a lack of pretense that put her at ease despite her lingering wariness. After the meal, Mrs. Finch shooed them into the sitting room while she cleared up. "You two talk. I've got things to do in the kitchen." An awkward silence fell once they were alone. Caleb stood by the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantel while Lillian perched on the edge of a chair, hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Finch tells me you've been making yourself useful," he said finally. "I hope so. I don't want to be a burden." Caleb turned to face her fully. "You're not a burden, Miss Dawson, but there's something we should discuss." He took a deep breath. The town will talk. A single woman living in my home, whatever the circumstances, will cause gossip. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. I hadn't thought of that. It doesn't bother me, Caleb assured her, but it might make things difficult for you if you choose to return to town eventually. People can be cruel. They already think the worst of me, Lillian said quietly. After my father died and I couldn't pay his debts, the respectable ladies wouldn't hire me for sewing anymore. Mr. Peterson kept me on at the shop out of kindness, but even he had to let me go when business suffered because of my presence. Caleb's expression darkened. That's not right. It's the way of things. Lillian managed a small smile. As you said yesterday, the law in society favors those with money and power. Well, you have a place here for as long as you want it, Caleb declared firmly. Mrs. Finch enjoys having another woman around, and your sewing skills will be appreciated. He hesitated. I ride into town every few weeks for supplies and business. If there's anything you need, or if you decide you want to look for other opportunities, just let me know. Lillian studied him, trying to understand this man who had paid so much for her freedom with seemingly no expectations in return. Why did you really buy my contract, Mr. O'Brien? Caleb? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. I told you about the debt I couldn't pay when I was younger. He looked up, meeting her eyes. What I didn't tell you was that the man I owed wanted me to do something illegal, rob a stagecoach. When I refused, he was going to have me killed. The man who helped me, he saw something worth saving in a foolish young cowboy. His voice softened. Yesterday at the auction, I saw something worth saving too. The simple honesty in his words touched Lillian deeply. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded once, then cleared his throat. It's getting late. You should rest. As Lillian climbed the stairs to her room that night, she found herself thinking about Caleb O'Brien in a way that both confused and unsettled her. He was her benefactor, her employer now, nothing more. Yet there was something about his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, that stirred feelings she thought had died with her hopes for the future. The days that followed settled into a routine. Lillian helped Mrs. Finch with the cooking and cleaning, and devoted several hours each day to mending and altering clothes for both Caleb and his ranch hands. The men were respectful, if curious about her presence, and she gradually learned their names and stories. A week after her arrival, Caleb announced at breakfast that he needed to ride into Hecla for supplies and to meet with the banker. Would you like to come along, Miss Dawson? Mrs. Finch has a list of things we need from the mercantile. Lillian hesitated. The thought of returning to town filled her with dread, facing the stares and whispers of the townspeople who had watched her being sold like cattle. Yet she knew she would have to face them eventually. Yes, I'll come, she decided. And please, after all this time, you should call me Lillian. A smile touched the corners of Caleb's mouth. Lillian, then. We'll leave in an hour. The ride to town was pleasant, despite Lillian's nervousness. Spring had fully arrived in Montana territory, painting the landscape with wildflowers and fresh grass. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her about the history of the area and the neighboring ranches. That's the Sutton place, he said, nodding toward a distant ranch house. Old man Sutton's been trying to buy me out for years, wants to expand his operation. Will you sell? Lillian asked, genuinely curious. Caleb shook his head firmly. Never. Double Circle is my home. I built it from nothing, and I intend to pass it on to my children someday. He glanced at her, then quickly away. If I ever have any, that is. They lapsed into comfortable silence until the buildings of Hecla came into view. Lillian felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. We don't have to stay long, Caleb said softly, noticing her tension. Just long enough to get what we need. Hecla hadn't changed in the week she'd been gone. The same dusty Main Street lined with false-fronted buildings, the same hitching posts and water troughs, the same saloon where men gathered to drink and play cards. But Lillian felt different, less desperate, less afraid. Caleb helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store. "I need to see Mr. Wilson at the bank. Will you be all right here for a half-hour or so?" Lillian nodded, straightening her borrowed dress. "I'll be fine. I'll start gathering the things on Mrs. Finch's list." Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Collins, looked up in surprise as Lillian entered. "Miss Dawson, I heard you'd been. That is, I didn't expect to see you again." "I'm staying at the Double Circle Ranch now, Mr. Collins," she replied evenly. "Working for Mr. O'Brien. I have a list of supplies he needs." The man's demeanor changed immediately. Caleb O'Brien was one of the most prosperous ranchers in the county, and his business was valuable. "Of course, Miss Dawson. Let me see that list." As Mr. Collins gathered the items, a woman entered the store, Mrs. Blackwood, wife of one of the town's most prominent citizens. She had been one of Lillian's regular customers before her father's death and subsequent fall from grace. "Lillian Dawson," Mrs. Blackwood said coldly. "I'm surprised to see you showing your face in town after your exhibition at the auction block." Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she held her head high. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood. They're saying you've taken up with Caleb O'Brien." The woman's voice carried clear across the store. "I suppose that's one way to pay your debts." Before Lillian could respond, the door opened again, and Caleb himself stepped inside. His expression darkened as he took in the scene. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Always a pleasure to hear your charitable Christian thoughts." The woman had the grace to flush. "Mr. O'Brien, I was just expressing concern for Miss Dawson's reputation. Miss Dawson is employed at my ranch as a seamstress and assistant to my housekeeper," Caleb stated firmly. "Any suggestion to the contrary reflects poorly on the person making it, not on her." He moved to Lillian's side, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "Are you ready? I've finished my business at the bank." Grateful for his intervention, Lillian nodded. "Mr. Collins is just wrapping up our order." As they left the store a few minutes later, parcels in hand, Lillian felt both humiliated and curiously uplifted. The encounter with Mrs. Blackwood had been mortifying, but Caleb's defense had been unexpected and touching. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. "Small towns have long memories and loose tongues." "Thank you for what you said," Lillian replied. "You didn't have to defend me." Caleb's expression was serious as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Yes, I did. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Your father's debts should have died with him." As they pulled away from the hitching post, Lillian spotted a familiar face watching from the doorway of the saloon, the scarred man who had bid on her at the auction. His expression was dark with malice, and a chill ran down her spine. "That man," she said, nodding discreetly in his direction. "Do you know him?" Caleb followed her gaze and frowned. "Wade Harden, a troublemaker and a bully. Best to steer clear of him." They were halfway back to the ranch when Caleb suddenly said, "I got something for you in town. It's not much, but I thought you might like it." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Surprised, Lillian accepted it. "You didn't have to get me anything." "Go on, open it," he encouraged, a hint of boyish eagerness in his voice. Lillian carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful silver hairpin adorned with a small pearl. "It's lovely," she breathed, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "I noticed you keep your hair pinned up," Caleb explained, suddenly seeming embarrassed. "Thought you might like something nice to do it with." "Thank you." Lillian ran her finger over the smooth pearl. This is the first gift I've received since my father died." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "You deserve much more than a hairpin, Lillian." The simple statement, spoken with such sincerity, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She quickly looked away, focusing on the distant mountains until she had composed herself. When they returned to the ranch, Mrs. Finch took one look at the hairpin and shot Caleb a knowing glance that made him clear his throat and mumble something about checking on the horses. "He's sweet on you," Mrs. Finch declared once they were alone in the kitchen, unpacking the supplies. "Don't be ridiculous," Lillian protested. "He feels responsible for me, that's all." Mrs. Finch shook her head, smiling knowingly. "I've known that boy for 7 years, ever since he hired me to cook for his growing operation. In all that time, I've never seen him buy jewelry for anyone, not even his fiancée. God rest her soul." Lillian didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject, telling Mrs. Finch about their encounter with Mrs. Blackwood instead. The older woman snorted in disgust. "That woman. She's got no more Christian charity in her than a rattlesnake, always looking down her nose at folks who have had a run of bad luck." She patted Lillian's hand. "Don't you mind her. You're making a new start here." That evening after supper, as Lillian sat by the fire mending one of Caleb's shirts, she was startled when he settled into the chair opposite her. Usually, he retired to his office after the evening meal to work on his ledgers and ranch business. "May I join you?" he asked, though he'd already sat down. "Of course," Lillian replied, continuing her neat stitches. "You're good at that," he observed, watching her hands. "My mother taught me. She was a professional seamstress back in Philadelphia." Lillian tied off a thread and bit it with her teeth before threading the needle again. She always said a woman with a useful skill would never starve. She was right. Caleb stretched his long legs toward the fire. "My mother taught me that hard work and honesty would get me further than shortcuts and schemes. My father disagreed. He was always looking for the quick dollar." His expression grew distant. "Left us when I was 12, chasing gold in California. Never heard from him again." "I'm sorry," Lillian said softly. "It must have been hard." Caleb shrugged. "Mother raised me and my sister on her own. She cleaned houses for the wealthy folks in Denver, worked herself to the bone to keep us fed and clothed." His voice softened with respect. "She's still there, living with my sister and her husband now. I send money every month, though she always tries to send it back." Lillian smiled. "She sounds like a proud woman." "Stubborn as a mule," Caleb agreed with a fond chuckle, "but she finally agreed to accept enough to stop working. She deserves to rest." They fell into comfortable conversation, sharing stories of their childhoods and families. Lillian found herself relaxing, enjoying Caleb's company in a way that felt natural and easy. His laugh was warm and genuine, his attention focused entirely on her, as if what she had to say truly mattered to him. When the clock on the mantel struck 10, Lillian realized with surprise how late it had grown. "I should retire," she said reluctantly. "Morning comes early." Caleb rose and helped her gather her sewing. "Thank you for the company, Lillian. It's been nice talking with you." "It has," she agreed, suddenly shy under his intent gaze. "Perhaps we could do it again tomorrow evening," he suggested. Lillian nodded, pleasure warming her at the thought. "I'd like that." True to his word, Caleb joined her by the fire the next evening, and the next. Their conversations ranged from books they had read to places they hoped to visit someday, from childhood dreams to adult realities. Gradually, Lillian found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings, to the sound of Caleb's voice and the sight of his rare, transforming smile. Spring advanced toward summer, and Lillian settled more comfortably into life at Double Circle. She had taken over much of the mending and sewing for the entire ranch, allowing Mrs. Finch to focus on cooking and other household duties. The two women had developed a warm friendship, and Lillian had begun to think of the ranch as home. One sunny afternoon, as she hung laundry on the line behind the house, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Caleb riding toward her, though he'd left that morning saying he wouldn't be back until supper. "Is something wrong?" she called as he dismounted. Caleb shook his head, a boyish excitement in his eyes. "Nothing's wrong. I just thought it's too fine a day to spend it all working. Have you ever ridden a horse, Lillian?" She blinked in surprise. "Not since I was a little girl. My father kept a gentle mare in Philadelphia, but we had to sell her before coming west. Well, it's time you learned again." He gestured to a second horse trailing behind his own, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "This is Penny. She's the gentlest horse on the ranch. I thought you might like to ride with me this afternoon." Lillian hesitated, looking at the half-filled basket of laundry at her feet, but Mrs. Finch already spoke to her. "She shooed me out here to get you, said the laundry would wait but the sunshine wouldn't." His smile was infectious. "What do you say?" Impulsively, Lillian returned his smile. "I'd love to." After changing into a split-riding skirt Mrs. Finch produced from somewhere, "My niece left it last time she visited. Should fit you well enough." Lillian found herself being helped onto Penny's back. Caleb's hands were strong and steady at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Remember to sit tall and keep your heels down," he instructed, adjusting her grip on the reins. "Penny will follow my horse, so you don't need to worry about guiding her too much. Just enjoy the ride." And enjoy it she did. They rode across rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, through stands of aspen trees whose leaves whispered in the breeze, along a bubbling creek where they stopped to let the horses drink. Caleb pointed out landmarks and told stories about the land, his deep voice painting pictures of the early days when he'd first come to Montana territory. "That ridge there," he said, pointing to a distant hill, "is the boundary of Double Circle to the east. Beyond that is Sutton Land." Lillian shaded her eyes against the sun. "Your ranch is so large. How many acres do you have?" 5,000, give or take. Pride colored his voice. "Started with just 500, added parcels as I could afford them." He turned in the saddle to look at her. "There's a place I want to show you if you're not too tired." "I'm not tired at all," Lillian assured him, surprised to find it was true. After initial stiffness, she'd found her seat again, and riding felt as natural as walking. Caleb led them up a gentle slope to the top of a low hill. There, spread out below them, was a panoramic view of the entire ranch, the main house and outbuildings at the center. Pastures dotted with cattle stretching in all directions, the distant glint of the creek they had followed, and beyond it all, the majestic mountains against the clear blue sky. "It's breathtaking," Lillian said softly. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch." Caleb dismounted and came to help her down. "I come here to think, to make big decisions, sometimes just to watch the sunset." As Lillian's feet touched the ground, Caleb didn't immediately release her waist. Their eyes met and held, and Lillian felt a fluttering sensation in her stomach that had nothing to do with the ride. "Lillian," he began, his voice husky. But whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the distant sound of a gunshot, followed by shouts from the direction of the ranch house. Caleb's expression immediately shifted to alarm. "Something's wrong. We need to get back." He helped her quickly onto Penny, then swung up onto his own horse. "Stay close to me." They rode hard back to the ranch, Lillian clinging to the saddle horn as Penny followed Caleb's mount at a gallop. As they approached the main house, they could see several men on horseback in the yard, facing off against Caleb's ranch hands. "Stay back," Caleb ordered as they drew closer, his hand going to the revolver at his hip. But it was too late for caution. One of the mounted men spotted them and pointed, shouting something to his companions. 3 riders broke away from the main group and galloped toward them. With growing horror, Lillian recognized the lead rider, Wade Hardin, the scarred man from town who had bid on her at the auction. "Well, look what we have here," Hardin called as he and his men blocked their path. The high and mighty Caleb O'Brien and his little auction block bride. "What do you want, Hardin?" Caleb demanded, positioning his horse slightly in front of Lillian's. "Just paying a neighborly visit," Hardin replied with a cruel smile. "Heard you were harboring stolen property." Caleb's face hardened. "Miss Dawson isn't property. I paid her father's debts legally. She's free." "That's so," Hardin drawled, "because I heard differently. Heard the auction wasn't properly registered with the territorial court. Heard the sale might not be valid after all." His eyes slid to Lillian, making her skin crawl. "In which case, she's still for sale to the highest bidder." "That's a lie," Caleb said flatly. "Sheriff Miller conducted the auction himself. Everything was legal." "Sheriff's gone to Helena for the week," Hardin replied. "Convenient timing for us to sort this out, wouldn't you say?" He moved his horse closer. "Tell you what, O'Brien. I'll give you 700 for her, 100 more than you paid. Fair and square." Lillian felt sick, the beautiful day shattered by this ugly confrontation. She looked past Hardin to the ranch yard, where she could see Tom and Charlie and the other hands watching tensely, hands near their weapons. "Miss Dawson isn't for sale at any price," Caleb stated firmly. "Now get off my land before I have my men escort you off." Hardin's scarred face twisted in anger. "You think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? With your big ranch and your fancy Eastern manners." He spat on the ground. "She's just a woman with debts. The law says—" "I know what the law says," Caleb cut him off. "And I know what's right. Miss Dawson is under my protection now. If you or anyone else tries to claim otherwise, you'll answer to me." His hand rested openly on his revolver now. For a tense moment, Hardin seemed to consider his options. Then he laughed, the sound ugly and forced. "Have it your way, O'Brien, but this isn't over." His gaze shifted to Lillian again. "See you soon, pretty lady." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back to his companions. After a brief conversation, the entire group rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Caleb watched them go, his expression grim. Only when they were well away from the ranch did he turn to Lillian. "Are you all right?" she nodded, though her hands trembled on the reins. "What did he mean the auction wasn't properly registered?" "Nonsense," Caleb said firmly. "He's just trying to cause trouble." But there was a flicker of concern in his eyes that belied his confident tone. They rode into the yard where the ranch hands gathered around them. "Boss, they just rode in demanding to see Miss Dawson," Tom explained. "Said they had papers proving she was still legally bound for her father's debts. When we told them to leave, one of them fired a shot in the air." Caleb dismounted and helped Lillian down, keeping a protective hand at her waist. "Nobody was hurt. No, sir, but they said they'd be back with the law on their side." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're bluffing. But just in case, I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak with Judge Harper. He'll confirm the auction was legal." He looked down at Lillian, his expression softening. "Don't worry, I won't let them take you." That evening, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Mrs. Finch clucked and fussed, clearly worried, though she tried to hide it with extra helpings at supper and cheerful chatter. Caleb was quieter than usual, lost in thought. After Mrs. Finch retired for the night, Lillian found Caleb in his office, poring over papers by lamplight. "May I come in?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, his face weary but his eyes warming at the sight of her. "Of course." Lillian entered and took the chair opposite his desk. "I want to thank you for today, for defending me again." Caleb set down his pen with a sigh. "You don't need to thank me, Lillian." "Yes, I do." She held his gaze steadily. "Most men would have taken Hardin's money and been rid of the trouble. You didn't have to stand up for me." "Yes, I did," he countered softly. "Because—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "Because what?" Lillian prompted. Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out into the darkness. "Because I care what happens to you," he said finally. "More than I should, perhaps." Lillian's heart quickened at his words. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "I brought you here to give you a safe place to stay until you decided what you wanted to do with your life. I never intended—" He trailed off again. "Never intended what?" Lillian rose from her chair, taking a step toward him. "To have feelings for you," Caleb admitted quietly. "To look forward to our conversations by the fire more than anything else in my day. To find myself thinking about your smile when I should be focusing on ranch business." He shook his head. "It's not appropriate. You're dependent on me, living under my roof. I don't want you to feel obligated or—" "Caleb," Lillian interrupted gently. She took another step closer. "I don't feel obligated, I feel—" It was her turn to struggle for words. "I feel alive again. After my father died, I thought my life was over too. Then you came and suddenly there was hope. And now—" She drew a deep breath. "Now there's more than hope." Caleb's eyes searched hers, as if seeking confirmation of what he'd heard. "Lillian, are you saying—" "I'm saying I have feelings for you too," she admitted, her cheeks warming with the confession. "Feelings I never expected to have again for anyone." For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then Caleb closed the distance between them, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I?" he whispered. Lillian nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Lillian felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you fixed my favorite shirt and scolded me for tearing it on a fence post." Lillian laughed softly. "That longer," he admitted with a smile. "But that's when I knew it wasn't just gratitude or protectiveness I was feeling." A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Mrs. Finch stood there in her nightgown and robe, a knowing smile on her face. "Don't mind me," she said, raising her hands. "Just getting a glass of water. Carry on." She winked at Lillian and disappeared down the hall toward the kitchen. Caleb groaned, but he was smiling. "We'll never hear the end of this." "I don't mind," Lillian said softly, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. Caleb covered her hand with his own. "Lillian, whatever Hardin is planning, I promise you I won't let him or anyone else hurt you. You're safe here." "I know," she replied, and realized she truly did believe it. The next morning, Caleb rode into Hecla alone, despite Lillian's protests that she should accompany him. "It's better if I speak with Judge Harper on my own," he insisted. "And I'll feel better knowing you're safe here with Tom and the boys keeping watch." Indeed, Caleb had doubled the guards around the ranch, with men positioned to watch the approaches from all directions. It seemed an excessive precaution in broad daylight, but after Hardin's visit, no one was taking chances. Lillian tried to focus on her sewing, working on a new shirt for Caleb from fabric Mrs. Finch had been saving for a special occasion. About time he had something nice to wear besides those trail-worn duds, the housekeeper had declared when Lillian explained her project. It was nearly sunset when they heard a rider approaching. Lillian rushed to the window, relief flooding her at the sight of Caleb returning safely. But her relief turned to concern as he drew closer. His expression was grim, his shoulders tense. She met him at the door. "What happened?" "What did the judge say?" Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Let's talk inside." In the sitting room, with Mrs. Finch hovering anxiously nearby, Caleb explained what he had learned. "Judge Harper confirms that the auction was conducted legally, but there's a complication. Your father apparently borrowed money from Wade Hardin shortly before his death, money that wasn't included in the debts settled by the auction." Lillian frowned. "That can't be right. My father never mentioned borrowing from Mr. Hardin." "Hardin has a promissory note with your father's signature," Caleb continued. "It could be forged, but it looks genuine according to the judge. The amount is substantial, $2,000. "2,000?" Lillian gasped. "That's impossible. What would my father have done with such a sum?" Caleb shook his head. "I don't know, but Hardin is claiming that since the debt wasn't part of the auction, you're still legally responsible for it." Mrs. Finch made a disgusted noise. "That's outrageous. The poor girl can't be held accountable for every scrap of paper her father signed." "Unfortunately, territorial law isn't clear on the matter," Caleb said grimly. "Judge Harper is reviewing the statutes, but in the meantime, he's issued an order preventing Hardin from taking any action until the matter is resolved legally." Lillian sank into a chair, feeling the ground shifting beneath her once again. "So I'm still not truly free?" "You are to me," Caleb said firmly, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "Whatever Hardin claims, whatever the judge decides, you will always be free with me. I'll pay the debt if I have to." $2,000. Lillian shook her head. "Caleb, that's an enormous sum. I can't let you do that." "It's just money," he insisted. "I have savings. The ranch is profitable." Mrs. Finch cleared her throat. "If you two will excuse me, I'll go check on supper. Been simmering all afternoon, it has." She left the room, closing the door behind her with pointed emphasis. Alone with Caleb, Lillian squeezed his hands gratefully. "You've already done so much for me. I can't ask for more." "You're not asking, I'm offering." He raised one hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "Lillian, I need to tell you something. When I first saw you on that auction block, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not since Emily died. A connection, a certainty that you were someone special." His voice lowered. "I told myself I was just being a good Christian, helping someone in need. But it was more than that from the beginning." Lillian's heart quickened at his words. "For me too," she admitted. "I was so afraid at first, afraid of what you might expect from me, but you never demanded anything. You just gave. No one has ever treated me with such respect, such kindness." Caleb's blue eyes were intense as they held hers. "I love you, Lillian. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon after everything you've been through. But I need you to know that whatever happens with Hardin and this alleged debt, my feelings won't change." Tears stung Lillian's eyes at his declaration. "I love you too, Caleb. I didn't think it was possible to feel this way again after losing everything, but you've given me back more than just a home. You've given me hope and joy," and he silenced her with a kiss, gentle yet filled with promise. When they broke apart, Lillian felt a certainty settle in her heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Double Circle. Lillian was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Finch prepare breakfast when they heard the sound of a carriage approaching. Looking out the window, she saw an elegant buggy being driven by a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. Caleb went out to meet the visitor, and a few minutes later he ushered the man into the house. "Lillian, this is Mr. Edwards, the banker from Helena. He's here about your father's affairs." Mr. Edwards was a small man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. He bowed slightly to Lillian. "Miss Dawson, I apologize for calling unannounced, but the matter seemed urgent." They settled in the sitting room, where Mr. Edwards removed several documents from his leather satchel. "I received a telegram from Judge Harper yesterday evening, inquiring about Jonas Dawson's financial dealings with the Bank of Helena. In reviewing our records, I discovered something that may interest you greatly." Lillian leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Your father did indeed borrow money shortly before his death, not from Wade Hardin, but from our bank." Mr. Edwards adjusted his spectacles. $2,000 to be precise, secured against a mining claim he had recently filed. Caleb and Lillian exchanged puzzled glances. "What mining claim?" she asked. "My father had given up prospecting in his final months. He was too ill." Mr. Edwards consulted his papers. "According to our records, Jonas Dawson filed a claim on a parcel of land approximately 15 miles north of Hecla, near Beaver Creek. He presented assay reports suggesting a potentially valuable silver deposit." Lillian shook her head in confusion. "He never mentioned this to me." "Perhaps he wanted to surprise you with good news if the claim proved valuable," Caleb suggested gently. "The curious thing," Mr. Edwards continued, "is that 2 weeks after securing the loan, your father returned to the bank and paid it in full in cash. He mentioned that he had sold a half-interest in the claim to a local businessman." "Wade Hardin," Caleb guessed, his expression darkening. Mr. Edwards nodded. "That was my conclusion as well, based on the current situation. However, your father's loan with our bank was fully satisfied before his death. We have no outstanding claims against his estate." Hope sparked in Lillian's chest. "So if my father paid the bank and supposedly sold half the claim to Hardin for the same amount, then Hardin's promissory note is either forged or it represents a separate transaction entirely," Caleb finished. "Either way, it changes the legal situation significantly." Mr. Edwards packed his documents carefully back into his satchel. "I've prepared a formal statement attesting to these facts, which I'll deliver to Judge Harper today. I believe it will help clarify matters considerably." After the banker departed, Lillian turned to Caleb, her mind racing. "If my father sold half the claim to Hardin, then I may still own the other half." "It's possible," Caleb agreed thoughtfully, "assuming the claim is valid and was properly registered." A new determination filled Lillian. "I need to go to the land office in Helena. If the claim is real, if there's truly silver there, it could be worth far more than $2,000. Hardin must think so too if he's going to these lengths to claim ownership," Caleb mused. "It would explain a lot." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Caleb arranged for a trusted ranch hand to escort Lillian to Helena, where she spent 2 days researching her father's affairs. She returned to Double Circle with momentous news. "The claim is real," she told Caleb excitedly as he helped her down from the wagon. "And it's registered jointly in my father's name and Wade Hardin's. But there's more. The assay reports show the silver deposit is substantial, potentially worth tens of thousands of dollars." Caleb whistled softly. "No wonder Hardin was so determined to control you. With your father gone, you're the only thing standing between him and full ownership of a small fortune." That evening, as they sat together in Caleb's office reviewing the documents Lillian had brought from Helena, a plan began to form. "According to this partnership agreement, any proceeds from the mine are to be split equally between the partners," Lillian pointed out. "If Hardin has already begun extracting silver, he owes you half," Caleb concluded. "And if he wants to buy your share, he'll have to pay fair market value, not just the original $2,000. A commotion outside interrupted their discussion. Tom burst into the office, his expression urgent. "Boss, riders coming looks like Hardin and his men, and they've got Sheriff Miller with them." Caleb rose quickly, his hand going to his revolver. "How many?" "5 men besides the sheriff," Tom reported. "They're at the main gate now." "Get the men together, but tell them no shooting unless I give the word," Caleb ordered. "This is going to be settled legally, not with gunplay." He turned to Lillian, his expression grave. "Stay inside with Mrs. Finch. No matter what happens, remember that I love you." Before she could respond, he strode out of the house to meet the approaching riders. From the window, Lillian watched anxiously as Caleb stood in the yard, flanked by his ranch hands, as Sheriff Miller and Wade Hardin dismounted. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, while Hardin wore a triumphant sneer. Unable to bear being left in the dark, Lillian slipped out the side door and moved closer, staying in the shadows of the porch where she could hear the conversation. "O'Brien," Sheriff Miller began awkwardly, "I've got papers here from Judge Harper. Seems there's some question about the Dawson girl's status." "Miss Dawson is a free woman," Caleb stated flatly. "I paid her father's debts in full at the auction you yourself conducted." "That's as may be," the sheriff conceded, "but Hardin here has a legal claim that wasn't part of those proceedings. Judge says the matter needs to be heard in court next week." Hardin stepped forward, his scarred face twisted in a smug smile. "Until then, the judge says the woman comes with me. After all, I've got as much claim to her as you do, O'Brien." "That's not what the order says, Hardin," the sheriff corrected, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It says Miss Dawson is to remain in protective custody until the hearing." "And I'm the injured party," Hardin insisted. "Makes sense she stays with me." Caleb's hand hovered near his gun. "She's not going anywhere with you, Hardin." The tension in the yard was palpable, with men on both sides poised for violence. Lillian couldn't bear it any longer. She stepped out from the shadows and walked purposefully toward the group. "Miss Dawson," Sheriff Miller said, startled by her appearance. "We were just discussing my fate," Lillian interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe I should have some say in that." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the papers she had brought from Helena. "Sheriff, are you aware that my father and Mr. Hardin were business partners?" The sheriff blinked in surprise. "Can't say that I was." "They jointly owned a silver mine north of town," Lillian continued, handing him the documents. "These papers prove it. My father invested $2,000, the same amount Mr. Hardin claims I still owe him." Hardin's face darkened as the sheriff examined the papers. "That's got nothing to do with this," he blustered. "The debt is separate." "Is it?" Lillian challenged. "Or did you create a false promissory note to try to gain control of my half of a valuable silver mine?" Murmurs spread among the watching men. Sheriff Miller looked from the papers to Hardin, suspicion growing in his eyes. "These look official," he said slowly. "Land office seal and everything. If these are genuine, Hardin, that puts a different light on things." "The Helena banker confirmed that my father paid back his original loan," Lillian added. "He used the money from selling half the claim to Mr. Hardin. There is no outstanding debt." Hardin's hand moved toward his gun. "This is nonsense. The girl's lying to protect herself." "Easy now," Sheriff Miller warned, his own hand dropping to his weapon. "Nobody's drawing iron here." He folded the papers carefully and handed them back to Lillian. "Miss Dawson, I think it's best if you remain here at Double Circle until the hearing. Mr. O'Brien, you'll be responsible for bringing her to court on Tuesday." "Gladly, Sheriff," Caleb agreed, moving to Lillian's side. Hardin spat on the ground. "This isn't over, O'Brien. Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Caleb replied evenly. "You tried to cheat a woman out of her rightful inheritance. The judge won't look kindly on that." After the sheriff and Hardin's group departed, Caleb pulled Lillian into a tight embrace. "That was brave of you," he murmured against her hair, and foolish. Hardin's dangerous. I couldn't let him take me, Lillian said, her voice muffled against his chest. And I couldn't let you risk yourself for me. Caleb drew back slightly to look into her eyes. I'll always risk myself for you, Lillian. Always. The court hearing the following Tuesday was brief but decisive. Judge Harper, a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the evidence presented by both sides. When Wade Hardin produced his promissory note, the judge compared it carefully with samples of Jonas Dawson's signature on the official mining claim documents. This signature appears to have been traced, the judge declared, peering over his spectacles at Hardin. It's similar but not identical to the authenticated signatures on the land office papers. Hardin's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge silenced him with a bang of his gavel. Furthermore, the timing makes no sense. Why would Jonas Dawson borrow money from Mr. Hardin when he had just received the same amount from selling half his claim to the very same man? In the end, the judge ruled that the promissory note was fraudulent, that Lillian lawfully owned half of the silver mine, and that Wade Hardin owed her an accounting of any profits already extracted from the operation. Hardin stormed out of the courtroom, his face mottled with rage, while Caleb and Lillian accepted congratulations from well-wishers, including Mrs. Finch, who had insisted on attending to see justice done. That evening, back at Double Circle, they celebrated with a special supper. Mrs. Finch outdid herself, preparing all of Caleb's favorite dishes, and even opening a bottle of wine that had been saved for a special occasion. After the meal, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Caleb took Lillian's hand in his. I've been thinking, he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, about the mine and what it means for you. Lillian turned to face him. What do you mean? You're a wealthy woman now, or soon will be. He ran his thumb gently over her knuckles. You could go anywhere, do anything you want. Return east, perhaps, to Philadelphia or New York. Live the kind of life your father always wanted for you. Understanding dawned on Lillian. You think I'll leave now that I have means of my own? Caleb couldn't quite meet her eyes. I wouldn't blame you if you did. Montana Territory is a hard place, especially for a woman. And Double Circle is just a cattle ranch, nothing compared to the comforts you could have elsewhere. Lillian reached up to touch his face, turning it gently until his eyes met hers. Caleb O'Brien, do you really think I care more for comfort than for love? She smiled softly. Double Circle isn't just a cattle ranch. It's the place where I found myself again, where I learned that I could be strong and brave. It's where I found you. Hope kindled in his eyes. Then you'll stay. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, she assured him. Besides, I have plans for my share of the mine. Oh, Caleb raised an eyebrow curiously. I'm going to use the profits to build a school in Hecla, Lillian explained. And perhaps a small hospital too. The town needs both desperately. Caleb's smile was full of admiration. You continue to amaze me, Lillian Dawson. I hope I always will, she replied softly. He stood suddenly, pulling her to her feet. There's something I need to show you. Taking her hand, he led her down from the porch and around to the side of the house. There, in a small cleared area, stood the frame of a new building, the wooden beams freshly cut and notched together. What is this? Lillian asked, curious. Caleb's expression was a mixture of shyness and pride. I started building it the day after our first kiss. It's going to be a proper home, bigger than the current house. Room for Mrs. Finch to have her own suite of rooms, a large kitchen like she's always wanted. He paused, his voice softening. And a nursery, for the future. Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes as she understood what he was saying, what he was offering. Caleb took both her hands in his and dropped to one knee. Lillian Dawson, I love you more than I ever thought possible after losing Emily. You came into my life unexpectedly, but now I can't imagine a day without you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's. I sent for it 2 weeks ago, hoping." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. "Will you marry me? Be my partner in everything in life, in love, in building a future here at Double Circle." Lillian felt tears spill down her cheeks as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Caleb. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepening with the promise of all that was to come. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above them, Lillian thought of how far she had come from the auction block where she had stood trembling and afraid, to this moment of pure happiness. Caleb had given her freedom, yes, but more importantly, he had given her the chance to choose her own path. And she had chosen him, this life, this love. "When?" she asked softly as they walked back toward the house, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "As soon as you like," Caleb replied. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, whenever you're ready." Lillian smiled up at him. 2 weeks, she decided. Time enough for a proper dress and for your mother and sister to come from Denver if they can make the journey. "They wouldn't miss it for the world," Caleb assured her. "Mother's been asking when I'd finally settled down properly for years now. And Mrs. Finch will want time to prepare a feast," Lillian added with a laugh. "She already knows," Caleb admitted. "Had to tell her to get her blessing. She threatened to quit if I didn't make an honest woman of you soon." Lillian's laughter rang out in the quiet evening. "That sounds like Mrs. Finch." True to Lillian's wishes, they were married exactly 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Double Circle. Judge Harper himself officiated, making a special trip from Helena for the occasion. Caleb's mother, a dignified woman with the same striking blue eyes as her son, and his sister Catherine with her husband and 2 children, came from Denver. The entire town of Hecla seemed to attend, eager to witness the union of the prosperous rancher and the woman he had freed from bondage. Mrs. Blackwood made a point of approaching Lillian after the ceremony, her manner considerably warmer than at their last meeting. "You've done well for yourself, my dear," she said, eyeing Caleb appreciatively. "And I hear you're to be quite wealthy with that silver mine." "The mine is already producing," Lillian confirmed pleasantly. "In fact, I've just commissioned architects to design a school and small hospital for Hecla. Perhaps you'd consider serving on the board of directors. Your experience with charitable works would be invaluable." The older woman preened at the flattery, apparently forgetting her previous disdain. "Well, of course, my dear. I'd be delighted to help the less fortunate." As Mrs. Blackwood moved away to share the news of her important new position with other guests, Caleb slipped his arm around Lillian's waist. "Nicely handled, Mrs. O'Brien." The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Lillian. "I've learned from the best," she replied, smiling up at him. "Keep your friends close and your enemies closer." "Speaking of enemies," Caleb said more seriously, "there's been no sign of Hardin since the court ruling. Sheriff Miller says he's left the territory, headed for Idaho apparently." "Good riddance," Lillian said firmly. "Though I almost feel sorry for the people of Idaho." The celebration continued well into the night, with dancing in the yard to fiddle music, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Finch and several women from town, and more well wishes than Lillian could count. Through it all, she remained by Caleb's side, her heart full to bursting with happiness she had once thought forever beyond her reach. When the last guests had departed or settled into makeshift beds in the main house and outbuildings, Caleb led his new wife to the bedroom they would now share. He had moved his things there that morning, making space in the closet and dresser for Lillian's growing collection of clothes, many of which she had sewn herself. "Are you happy, Mrs. O'Brien?" he asked softly as they stood together in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Lillian assured him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "When I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Caleb kissed her tenderly. "I thank God every day that I was in town that morning, that I had the means to help you." His voice grew husky with emotion. "But what began as charity has become the greatest blessing of my life." "You are free with me," Lillian quoted his words from that first day, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "You didn't just free me from bondage, Caleb. You freed my heart to love again." As moonlight bathed the room in silver, husband and wife sealed their vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, respect, and freedom to be themselves together. In the years that followed, Double Circle prospered under their joint stewardship. The new house was completed the spring after their wedding, spacious and comfortable with the promised suite for Mrs. Finch and a nursery that was soon filled with the joyful sounds of children. First a son they named Jonas, after Lillian's father, then twin daughters, Emily and Rose, and finally another son, Michael. The silver mine continued to produce, though less abundantly after the first few years. True to her word, Lillian used the proceeds to build the school and hospital in Hecla, transforming the rough mining town into a more civilized community. She occasionally taught at the school herself, passing on her mother's sewing skills to a new generation of girls. Caleb expanded the ranch operations, adding sheep and horses to the cattle business. Double Circle became known throughout the territory for its fine stock and fair dealings. He served 2 terms as territorial representative, advocating for the rights of small ranchers against the encroachment of large Eastern syndicates. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Lillian leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The auction." Caleb covered her hand with his, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly I thank Providence for putting me in the right place at the right time." "The right man in the right place," Lillian corrected, smiling up at him. "It took courage to do what you did." "Not courage," Caleb disagreed gently. "Just the certainty that it was the right thing to do." He kissed her softly. "The courage was all yours, my love, to trust a stranger to rebuild your life, to open your heart again." Their eldest son called to them from the yard, eager to show off a new trick he had taught his pony. Lillian and Caleb rose together, walking hand in hand to join their children in the golden light of the Montana sunset, free in the life they had built together on the foundation of one man's compassion and one woman's resilience, a love story that had begun on an auction block, but would continue for all their days beneath the vast western sky.